Hi there everybody, it's Neil from Flames Pyro Art Tutorials for Beginners again, and today we're going to have another look at the flower that we started in the last video. So we got to this stage where we'd negative burned some of the outside of some of the petals. Today we'll have a look at some of the shaping of petals. Today I'm using the spoon shader from the Optima, and I've got my heat setting at level 2. I want to burn very lightly and just see what effect we get with this pen tip, as I haven't used it much yet. Now when we're thinking about a flower, you have to think about all the shapes and contours to the petals. They don't all just lie flat, do they? So we need to be able to show some shape and natural flow to the petals. You can do things as simple as, let's say if you wanted to curve a petal so it was looking inwards, then you would shade from the inside, flicking upwards in the direction that you would like the petal to go. So have your heat down low, because you're just experimenting at this stage with different looks. Always at its innermost is going to be where there's the least amount of light getting to the petal, so that obviously has to go darker at some stage. But just by adding some shading, we can completely change the shape of a flower's petals. This one we're going to try and make into more of a bowl shape. So we know at its centre it's going to be shaded. And also to show the contour, we have to shape the sides of it as well. Remember, do this on a low heat, just so you can experiment and play about, see what works for you. What works for one person may not work for another. But flowers and petals are really forgiving, because they come in such a massive amount of shapes and sizes that you can't really go wrong. As you see, we're If you want this petal edge to be stood up, then we need to shade from the bottom in an upward motion of the shape that we're trying to achieve. I mean, that's why remember when I first started doing wood burning, and I started out with flowers. I remember I had these stencils and stencil out these roses and try and wood burn them, and they always just looked flat, and I just couldn't quite get them to look more realistic. And then over time and learning, watching others, I learned there was a subtle ways of totally transforming the petals of flowers to be pretty much any shape that you want. And this heat setting may still be a bit too high at 2, so we'll just lower it down a touch more. Because remember, we always want the control, we don't want to go all in straight away with the burning. We want to be able to get a feel for what we're doing, get the muscle memory, get the image in our mind of what we're trying to achieve. And if you have that heat too high, you lose the control over your pen. Flowers along with any other pyrography that you do, it's still layering, is still part of the process, still building up shapes. You don't just turn your burner on to glowing hot and just scorch the wood. There are some artists out there who are very good at doing that, but for new people who are trying to learn this art form, I wouldn't advise it. Plus you go through your tips a lot faster. They're not meant to be run on permanently high heat. Pyrography is all about subtle shades of, I know it's all done in sepia or sepia, or however you want to pronounce it, but it's all about subtle shading. That's what makes a piece of art. So as we can see with this one, this particular petal, we've got it like coming in to a dip in the middle, so the petal is no longer flat. Like I said, you can just experiment. You can't go wrong with flowers and petals. They can be whatever your imagination wants them to be. want this one to tail off at its tip. So again, we have to show that by subtle shading. On the very tip of the petal to make it look like it's curving away at the end. This is one of the few times I've had to use this new spoon shader from Optima from carvertools.com. The engineer and designer Pat, who makes these pens, they're all made to the very highest quality. What that guy doesn't know about thermodynamics probably isn't out there. He blows me away with his knowledge on how heat transferring works, and a lot of the designs are his own unique designed pens. That he's made working alongside some of the artists. You ask him for a specific kind of pen and then he sets to work and design and engineering new pen tips. And this spoon shader was one of his new ones. I was lucky enough over Christmas to, like I said, I won a competition to win 8 pens from Carver Tools. So now I've got 13 of the set. There's a lot more than 13 available, but every one of them is handmade by Pat, all to the highest quality. He doesn't sell on Amazon or eBay. You have to go to carvertools.com, or it does have a Facebook page that he doesn't go on that often, but he does have one called PJL Enterprises. Okay, so this petal, we could have this one falling away. To just experiment with laying down different light burns and see what effect you get from it. It's one of the beauties of doing flowers is there is no right or wrong way. So that noise you hear is me on my e-cig. these more internal petals here, these are really going to be like standing up. So we want to show that now by darkening. See how by building up darkness, you can change the effect. And go, as you see, just by even just adding that one simple bit of shade in there, it gives the appearance that this petal is tailing off inside of the actual flower. Gives it the appearance that it's, you know, it's standing up more. Go back to this one. I said that's where you can just play about. You could just draw a flower with lots and lots of petals on it and just experiment. Just play about and see what effects you can achieve. What we'll say is at the base of all of these petals coming off, there will be the least amount of light getting to these areas. So where there's less light, you must go darker. That's where your imagination comes in. If you think about, say if you were looking at this flower and all the petals were standing up, there'd be certain areas, wouldn't there, where it'd be dark, where the sunlight wasn't getting through. That's what you're trying to achieve. It can take a steady hand at times, but that's why I always promote keeping the heat down, just so you stay in control at all times of your wood burning. Again with this petal, I want to add some shape. This isn't doing it from any reference picture, this is just from my own mind, just experimenting. seeing what effects work and what doesn't. See, this particular petal here, this one is very much standing up and curling over, so right at the very base of this particular petal is going to be very dark because there's the least amount of light getting under there, and we want to push it back. Remember, when we go darker, we push things back compared to when it's next to something lighter, that will look further forward. So by darkening, we push back, lighter burns next to them, give the perception of something that is closer to us. So we can see this petal here, there's going to be some shadowing. As it's folded over. This is the underneath of this particular petal. So at this stage I don't want to touch the top, because I want to try and make it have the effect that it's actually curling over. Let's have a look at some others. So as you can see, by flicking along the edge of this petal, this gives it the effect of dropping away. But yet, as we know, in its middle, it's going to be bold. You know, it's going to have some shape to the middle of it, isn't it? So again, at the darkest point, we have some darker shading. And luckily, when we were negative burning, we've put a line there, but we can introduce more into that line as we progress. You'll give even more depth. I think these spoon shaders would be ideal for doing faces and cheeks, and you know, that divot on the face where the cheekbone sinks in, this tip is shaped to be ideal for doing things like that. I know I had a look at it on a human portrait I'd started working on, and it seemed to work very well for shaping skin and all the contours of the face. There's another petal that's shaping over, sitting over the top. So naturally underneath there'll be less light getting to the petal, so we have to go darker. We don't want to get too dark too soon, so we can leave ourselves room for any adjustments or different ideas we have. Don't overcommit, is what I'm trying to say. Don't overcommit yourself to something until you have it clear in your mind, if you like. And the effect that it's showing, then continue with it by just building it up. And this one's going to be bold, because all this plant is going to be like sort of like curling in, isn't it? Don't know what kind of flower it is. And you can spend hours and hours just playing about with different looks, different burn strokes, to see what works for you. Just having the imagination in your mind as to how you think of flowers, how you think the petals would look in real life. If you actually saw this plant in real life, how would it look? How would all the different contours and shapes be shown through the depth of the colours? I know we can only work in one colour when we're wood burning, but we can still do some pretty good things with that one colour. Well, it's one colour, but it's different shades of that one colour. It's just to remember, no petal is ever, unless you pressed it, it's never truly flat, is it? So like I said, by adding shading down the side of the petal can make it look like it's shaped completely differently. And I can just play away with this for hours and hours, but I don't want to bore you all to tears. It's just teaching you some of the principles of how by adding shading can totally transform the look. Of the flower's petals. And a lot of pyrographers who are new to pyrography start off with a simple rose design, and they're very good, but they could take them just that step further just by shading the petals up a little more. Would add that extra dimension, that extra wow factor to the brilliant early attempts at pyrography. There's a petal that's sat underneath this top one. So by going much darker in the middle of this particular one, you can add even more depth. You can make this particular petal look like it's really pushed down further. A lot of it is just thinking where your light would come from, which is a skill I'm still acquiring myself. So I do practice pieces like this. As every artist is always learning new things. The only way to learn is to practice. I don't even know if you can see it on camera at the moment. Sorry. And underneath here, there's going to be less light again. And this tip isn't ideal to get perfectly in there, but I'll use the edge. And see if I can get in. I'm just going to play away with this for a bit if you want to watch along. See if you pick anything up for your own burning, and that's great. I'm just going to play about with this flower for a little while and see what I can come up with. Now if you're wanting to bowl a particular petal into like a curve shape, then you have to be darker at the middle to push that down. And that's a darkening, pushes things down and back. And that's really, they hear a lot in pyrography about blending. Blending is where you take the most darkest area, which is, as you can see here, is there, and instead of going from black to nothing, it's blending out a smooth transition of your colour, variants of your variants of shading. All about blending them out, and you can't blend if your tip is glowing hot. It's just impossible. You'll save yourself from having to clean your tips as often as well if you don't have your heat setting too high. The higher you have it, the more likelihood is you're going to get carbon build up as you're scorching the wood. Whereas if you keep your heat lower, there's less chance of that carbon build up. When it comes to cleaning tips, I'll do another video another time, but never ever use sandpaper on your tips. It's the worst thing you can do to clean your tips. I did it when I started, I'll admit it. I remember with the first upgraded machine I bought, I was getting a lot of carbon build up on the tips, and I was taking sandpaper to it and cleaning it off, and over time I was grinding away more and more without realising it to the edge of the tip and totally changing the pen tip to what you use is what they call a leather strop, which is can be something like this, or a leather belt. You know, the suede side of the soft leather of the belt. You can get some polishing compounds which comes with the Optima. You dip your pen into the polishing compound, heat it up a little, and then polish it on your leather strap. But what you don't want to do with the tips is polish them so that they're gleaming silver, because then you're taking the oxidization layer off. This is from what I've been told off Pat, the engineer who makes these machines. Don't get me wrong, I would not have known that. He said you do not want your tips to be permanently silver shiny. You're overshining them. You want to build a layer of what he calls oxidization onto the tip. So there's also, you can over polish your tips as well. That's another thing you have to watch out for. But never sandpaper or using tea strainers or whatever. You're just going to wreck your tips. And if you